in the middle that just has questions. A group that says, I'm interested and I'm keen to get vaccinated if only someone could help me get these following questions answered. That's what I'd actually love to hear about the most today. What are the questions that you are hearing around vaccinations that you feel are an impediment to people within your congregations? If that's something that we can help get you answers around, then we will absolutely do so. But again, that's where I'd like to talk about today. Tactically, how can we help your members get vaccinated? And then strategically, how can we help them? How can we help equip you to answer their questions for them? So with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to all of you to raise whatever questions I can help answer today. And I'm just going to go ahead and start with what I see in the chat, which is a question for Jane, who indicates that she's got a member who feels that the vaccine is rushed and thus might not be safe. This is probably, I would rank this as the #1 question that has been asked across the state since December 14th, when vaccines were first introduced, if not before then. Fortunately, much has changed between now and December, namely hundreds of millions of doses of vaccine that have been administered around the globe, and virtually no short-term side effects that have been observed other than the ones that were noted in the clinical trials, which for those of you who've been vaccinated know that entails maybe a little bit of pain in your arm, and then particularly after the second dose, maybe about 12 to 24 hours of feeling crummy. There haven't been any longer term side effects that have been discovered. That's a good thing. Generally speaking, with vaccines, there are not side effects that emerge years or decades later. To the extent that there are side effects, they emerge hours to days after the vaccine, not weeks to months or years later. That's another good thing. The other thing to note is that although the vaccines were sped up, they weren't rushed at all. The normal regulatory processes that would have otherwise been observed around the clinical trials being properly conducted and the manufacturing standards being properly adhered to, those were all in place for these vaccines. So I don't think it's quite right to say the vaccines were rushed. They were definitely made a priority by every single scientist and regulatory agency around the globe. That's a good thing, again, but it doesn't mean that corners were cut whatsoever. I'll just end and then I'll open it back up as well. To the extent that folks hear that and they still say, yeah, well, I still think it was rushed. Understood. I understand where those folks are coming from. The question then is, what's a bigger risk? Is COVID the bigger risk, or are the vaccines the bigger risk? And just today, for example, we reported an additional 10 individuals who died. Now, many of those folks died throughout the course of May, not all within the last 24 hours, but people are still dying of COVID, and we still have just under 80 people in the hospital with COVID, the majority of whom are unvaccinated. So I hear that folks still think that the vaccines were sped along, but then the question is, what's a bigger risk right now in front of you? And for me, I think it's still COVID any day of the week.
Shah, I see a question in the chat about whether or not someone who has had COVID-19 last year needs a vaccine.
Yep, the answer is that they should still get vaccinated. And this question too has been one that a lot of folks have asked to us. And they might wonder, well, wait a minute, if I had COVID, isn't my body's immune system good enough to keep me good in the future? And the answer is, yeah, it is, but the vaccines can help it along even more. One of the good findings about the COVID vaccine is that the duration and the degree of immunity that the vaccines bring on top of having already had COVID really fortifies the immune system. So even someone who's previously had COVID should still get vaccinated. It may not be the urgency as someone who has never had it, but they should still ultimately get vaccine. I think I've already seen questions and I knew they were going to come up about singing. So let's just get right to that and dive right in. And if and I know many of you have raised those questions to us. So let's take the time to discuss singing as carefully as possible. First of all, let me start by saying that some of this will differ based on the degree of vaccination of your congregations. A congregation that has a 100% vaccination rate can approach the question of singing differently from a congregation that has only, say, a 5% vaccination rate. You may not know what the vaccination rate in your congregation is. Understood. So let's just take it for all comers. Singing in an enclosed space is unfortunately one of the riskier things of behaviors out there. It's right up there with going to an all-night rave. Now, many of your congregants are probably not going to all-night raves, so there is a distinction here, but unfortunately, singing in an enclosed space at a high volume, close to other people in a choir, it's on the riskier side of behaviors. Now, is it as risky as it was 6 months ago or a year ago? No, because the volume of vaccinations has made it less risky. That is to say, there's more folks who are immune now, but it's still something that we have to think and talk carefully about. Here's where I think we can come on when it comes to singing. There's a spectrum of safety behaviors, and each congregation is going to have to make a determination of where they wish to fall on that spectrum. The safest thing to do is not to sing. I just have to start there, unfortunately. But for many of you, that is not an acceptable position, and I get that. So where I want to talk about today is how to make singing as safe as possible. If you happen to be in that group that makes singing a priority, there are some things you can do. One would be to space out as much as possible. If you can space people out at least 6 feet, as well as to have folks wear masks while they're singing, the combination of those two things, on top of getting as many people vaccinated, will help reduce the risk. 2 out of 3 of those things will reduce the risk, but not as much. So if you can only have people be masked and have them be close together, there's more risk there. If you can only do 1 out of those 3 things, again, there's going to be commensurately more risk. You're not able to do any of those 3 things. If you have a congregation that's not vaccinated, can't wear masks, and have to be shoulder to shoulder, that's a risky situation. And you run the chance of having an outbreak happen. And there have been documented outbreaks of exactly those scenarios. I can't make that determination for you. We're not in the same position where we were a year ago. This is going to be a congregation by congregation decision and discussion. We can help equip you with the things that will make these activities as safe as possible, but there is not a one-size-fits-all rule anymore. That may, for some of you, be welcome, but for others of you, may leave you wanting more. I'm going to stop talking there and get some feedback on that and get some reaction to that. And oh, absolutely, outdoors is better than indoors. I should have said that. If doing these singing and choral activities is something that can be moved outdoors, the risk goes down very significantly. I mean, I didn't even know that was on the table, but if moving singing outdoors is feasible, that is absolutely the right place to start, 100%. So let me stop there and get some more feedback on the singing piece.
I'll stick my neck out there and ask, congregational singing versus, in closed spaces, meaning windows shut, is not something we would do. If windows are wide open, people are spaced out, people are masked, and a majority are vaccinated, that is one of the safe ways. Yes?
That is a safer way to do so. The only ways to make that even safer would be to have everyone in the sanctuary be fully vaccinated, or be outside. But leaving those two in abeyance for a moment, what you described, windows fully open with a lot of ventilation, pumping that air through, folks being 6 feet apart and fully masked, that is a relatively safer way to go about it. That's right. And I'm not trying to be cagey. I hope folks know that I like to give it to folks as directly as possible. But we're just in this world now where the word safe doesn't mean what it did a year ago, right? A year ago, I could say what safe was because no one was vaccinated and the virus was everywhere around us. But now safe has so many meanings, and it's just I as much as I would love to give you a really direct binary answer, it means different things in different parts of the state for different congregations, and hence why there's more nuance that's involved as a result.
Dr. Shah, may I ask if you have, I know you're not a prophet, but do you have, I just want to thank you so much for the ways that you have been communicating with all of us in Maine. But I want to ask you if you know, if you guess or imagine how things are going to change, like this is June the 3rd. Is it going to be easier to sing in July, in August? Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, I'm happy to speculate a little bit, which is something I don't usually do in general, and definitely not with news media, but in a group of this nature, I'm happy to speculate just a little bit, which is to say it is likely that the trajectory that we are on, decreasing case numbers, decreasing hospitalizations, will continue for the next 6 to 8 weeks or so throughout the summer. There's really nothing in the offing that would change that. And thus singing in sanctuaries is likely to become a little bit safer with each passing week. When we get into the fall, no one's quite sure what's going to happen. Certainly seasonal colds and flu will be back. And with that, questions around, is it COVID, will be back. So the fall presents more questions, but through the summer, it's likely that we will continue the trajectory, the favorable trajectory that we are on right now. And that too will affect the safety calculus. Indeed, what might be a little bit risky today, 8 weeks from now might be totally safe. And again, that's why that's why we're not doing the checklists. It's why there's not a binary or dichotomous view of what is safe and what is not safe. It really does depend. A congregation that skews very, very young and fully vaccinated is much different from what can do things that a congregation that skews older and largely unvaccinated should not. And again, it's a spectrum, it's a sliding scale.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
And absolutely, and Jane reminds me, and I should have noted this at the top, we should also bear in mind considerations around children, particularly those 12 and under, under 12, who are not able to be vaccinated right now. So if all of the adults in your congregation are fully vaccinated, there was a question I saw flash on the screen about whether it's safe for them to be singing. Certainly safe as it relates to one another. But then if there are children in the audience or even in the choir, we've got to bear their risk in mind as well. That's a great point, Jane. Thank you. I'm sorry I neglected to mention that. And all of this is like a chess game that's playing out in real time where you make a move and then the virus makes a move. So you've got a lot of kids in the congregation that you want to sing. If you can do it outside, hey, that's great. If you've got, it's just a chess game with so many variations.
And Dr. Shah, just to clarify, if the congregation is fully vaccinated, they are okay being indoors without masks and singing?
Yeah. Although are there kids in there too?
Good question. I'm speaking for lots of churches. So let's say yes and no, right? There may be some with children, some without.
Yeah, so if there's a congregation that literally where everyone in the sanctuary, every single person is fully vaccinated, that presupposes that they're all 12 and over. then they can do things that the other congregation that we'll talk about in a moment can't, probably including singing. Although if that congregation, albeit fully vaccinated, has a lot of older folks in it who have a lot of health problems, then maybe singing without masks on is not the best idea. Even though the viruses are spectacularly effective, maybe out of an abundance of caution, you try to move the singing outdoors or have people wear masks. It's hard to be, I'm trying to strike a balance between being just the right amount of safe, because we're also at a point right now where being too safe has downsides, which is to say not engaging in fellowship, not seeing friends and family members. So I don't want to be alarmist and be too safe. It does depend on the congregation there. But on the other hypothetical, a congregation where all the adults are fully vaccinated, but there's kiddos who aren't, that singing, especially if there's not great ventilation, can easily generate the aerosols, the droplets that can carry the virus far and wide, potentially affecting those who are 12 and under.
So my question is, we're vacation land, right? So we have a whole bunch of people coming from a whole different parts of our country who've had a very different approach to dealing with the virus than Maine has. We, in our congregation, we're continuing to require masks and social distancing because we don't want to ask the question, have you been vaccinated? And part of that's because we're not confident, and this sounds funny coming from a church, but we're not confident we're going to get the truth. And we don't want to put somebody on the spot if they have a very good medical reason why they can't get the vaccine. And so our concern is, and some of the pushback that we've gotten is that we're being too safe, that we're being too restrictive. So I guess I'm looking for a little affirmation that we're doing what's right for us. And that's kind of what I hear you saying by this is a case by case basis. So every congregation is going to have to make that.
But they will, but I will tell you that both your analysis as well as your approach, as well as your analysis, your strategy and your tactics sound completely right to me. You've got two somewhat unsavory choices in front of you. One unsavory choice is to ask and verify everyone's vaccination status. Maybe you would be comfortable just asking, maybe not. I would hope that no one would lie to you, Reverend, but hey, who knows? The other unsavory choice is to require everyone to wear a mask and thereby avoid that question. Neither is a perfect world. That has been the lesson of the pandemic. There is no perfect world. Maybe there never was, and it's going to be a while before we get away from this dilemma. But I will tell you again, I think strategically as well as tactically, you are, in my view, I think approaching this thoughtfully and certainly in a manner that is very consistent with good public health practice. I don't think by wearing a mask, one could be accused of being too safe. As a congregational matter.
Dr. Shah, I see a question asking about the safe administration of communion.
Ooh, boy. I don't know. I don't have a great answer. So I'll start with this. Generally speaking, transmission of COVID from surfaces to humans has not really been it has not been a feature of transmission. I know a year and change ago, we were all wiping down our groceries and such things. And I think it's very safe to move away from that degree of cleansing and moving more toward just everyday types of cleaning, that which you would normally do. And I think that informs the communion discussion, which is to say, the risk from communion, to the extent that there is one, is likely to be by virtue of the fleeting but close interaction and not by the passing the wafers or the wine themselves. I did see someone note the prepackaged. I didn't know there was a supplier that was already doing it, but shouldn't be surprised by that. That certainly takes what may already be a low risk and reduces it even further and provides psychological assurances for members of your congregations. And then again, outside, you know, there are numerous studies that have looked at the relative safety of outside versus inside. And depending on which epidemiologist you ask, it's kind of like asking an economist. You can kind of just ask different ones and get different answers, and you'll get about a dozen of them. But at least all of the epidemiologists that have looked at outdoor transmission have found that it is anywhere from 95 to 99% safer than indoor events. So if you're looking for ways to take what is thankfully already a slightly lower risk in Maine relative to the rest of the country, and you're looking to drop that even further, the more you can move services and activities outdoors will I think maybe help you and your congregation sleep at night.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. And I know it's 3 o'clock and you said that you were with us until just about 3. So we want to honor your time and just very much appreciate that you were able to join us today. Jane, I don't know if you wanted to chime in when I saw you on mute.
I do. I want to thank you, Dr. Shah, not only for today, but for everything you have been doing for the past 19 months. I hope you see all the hands and the you are our hero. We appreciate your work, and your colleague, Dr. Siri Bennett, who helped us develop the At the Threshold guide for churches back last spring. You guys have been amazing, and we've got your back.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all of you. I would be remiss if I didn't express both my thanks, but more importantly, my humility on this. I happen to be the guy that's lucky enough to get to talk about some of these things, but the real work is done by a team of hundreds of people across this entire state. Some of us are with you. We've got Dr. McDonald and Liana and Ian, to say nothing of dozens, hundreds of other people. I get to have the privilege of just talking about a lot of the work that they're all really doing. And it truly is a privilege, but there are so many people that have made Maine the state that we are.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. And several of us from the department are going to stay on so we can continue the conversation. I do want to just take a brief moment since just highlight who's here, since we wanted to jump in right with Dr. Shah. We didn't have an opportunity to all introduce ourselves, and there's a number of colleagues from the department here who can continue to answer questions. So as I said, I work in the Commissioner's Office managing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have really been thinking about much of our vaccine equity efforts. And so I had the pleasure of coordinating today's meeting with Jane, but we have several other colleagues. So I'm just going to ask if my colleagues from the department would mind briefly unmuting and saying hello so folks know who's here. And then I will briefly talk about how we are working with community groups to host pop-up clinics shortly.
I'm Sharon McDonald. I'm the director of COVID-19 social services, and I've worked with some of you. We have a program that works with the chaplains that's fantastic that I hope to just highlight, as well as social services for people that are cases or contacts. And I'll turn it to Ian Yaffe.
Good afternoon. My name is Ian Yaffe. I have been working with DHHS for about 3 months now, and primarily on the contract management side of the social supports and vaccine equity funding. So trying to make that process smooth for organizations that receive funding from DHHS. And I'll pass it over to Carla.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carla Hunt. I'm on the referral side. I work for DHHS COVID social support and coordinate all the efforts of getting those referrals from the public and agencies and out to organizations and agencies that can support folks who are either COVID positive or contacts.
I see Lindsay Hammis. I don't know if her video's off, but I'm not, hopefully she's here. There she goes.
Hey there, sorry. Yes, I was just typing up an answer for somebody in the chat as well. I'm Lindsay Hammis, I'm the Director of Vaccine Communications at the Maine CDC.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I did want to make sure that folks knew that there is an opportunity if you're interested in hosting vaccination clinics. And some folks may say, why would I want to do that? Or what would that look like? I am a church and not a medical clinic. Tell me more. We began working with a number of community-based organizations to bring vaccine clinics much more locally. Admittedly, the state really did focus early vaccine efforts on volume, right? On really trying to get as many shots in arms as we could early on when vaccines became available. But as we've moved past that phase, in many ways, some of you have probably noticed some of the larger scale vaccination sites beginning to scale back. I know that in my town of Brunswick, the large site at the rec center has now closed. It's moved over to the hospital. And so what we are seeing is slightly less demand, for sure. Many people have already received their vaccine, but there are certainly people who haven't, and many of you highlighted, there are certainly still people who have questions and concerns about the vaccine that have gone unanswered, some who just want to wait and see a little bit longer to make sure they feel comfortable and safe, and others who have real opposition to the vaccine. We still believe that there's a number of people in our communities who may still want to be vaccinated, but haven't found it to be convenient, to be honest, right? They may work. They may be hourly employees who can't step away from work, or have employers who haven't offered them paid time off. They may live in areas where driving 1 or 2 towns over is just not what they do, right? And so it's not that they're opposed, but they're going to wait for it to come close to where they do business, to their community. And what we have found is that when vaccine clinics are hosted by community-based organizations with voices that they trust, and people that they trust, that people are sometimes willing to get vaccinated where they may not have been willing to do so before. One example of this has been that we have actually had several community-based organizations work with the mosques, both in Portland and Lewiston, to host vaccination clinics. And that happened a few different ways. In many cases, it was the imam who spoke with their congregation to say, this is okay. Often they were vaccinated themselves as part of the clinic to sort of show this is okay. They talked about it in relation to their faith. They talked about it as safe to break fast during Ramadan. And then they created the clinic right there at the mosque. We worked with them to pair them with a provider who could bring vaccine. So they weren't necessarily putting shots in people's arms. We made sure that we had approved medical providers to partner with them, but they were really the ones who coordinated, who set it up, and who messaged to their communities. And we certainly have found that in those scenarios, people have said, you know what, here I'm willing, or here I am willing alongside my family to get vaccinated. Some of the mosques have held multiple clinics, and what they have found is that maybe 50 people will be vaccinated the first time, and 3 weeks later, when they come back to do a second dose, there's another group of people who say, you know what, I saw this, I've had to think about it, but now I feel like I'm ready. And this is where I feel most comfortable doing this with my family. So we have certainly seen some of the mosques. Portland Mosque has now had several clinics, and they're sort of scheduling them on a monthly basis in order to continue to offer that opportunity to their community members. So there is a fairly simple process in order to host a vaccine clinic if that's something somebody would like to do as part of their church. There is a form. Sharon, I believe, maybe already put up in the chat, or will do so for me. Thank you. There's a link to a pretty simple web form that will ask you some basic questions. The threshold is you need to know that we could vaccinate 10 people, and that's just to avoid vaccine waste. We are very fortunate in this country to have enough vaccine right now, but that's obviously not true around the world, and we still want to be responsible about how we administer vaccine. And unfortunately, the way vaccine is packaged, once you open the vial, it needs to get used. And so we've lowered that number over time as supply has begun to exceed demand, but we still want to try to make sure we can do 10 shots that day. just to be responsible. So we just ask that people sort of do a little bit of legwork, pull their community, make sure that they feel like they would have at least 10 people, and think through, and we have some guidance documents that can help you think through what it looks like to set up a clinic or staff a clinic that day. And then the state can help you if you don't have a relationship with a medical provider to pair you with a provider. Sometimes that's a commercial pharmacy, sometimes that's our public health nurses, other times that's hospital groups or FQHCs who will come coordinate with you and come to actually put shots in arms and dispose of medical waste and do all of the parts that that are sort of technical and require medical expertise. And then yes, and the answer to that is yes, 10 regardless of age. Good question. And so so it could be one family of 10 and that is still worth it, right? So so bear that in mind. And then the other thing I wanted to raise just for people's awareness is that if you're worried about just hosting a clinic without first providing information and you'd like to work with a clinician, some of you may have clinicians as part of your congregations and feel like you have that covered, but if you'd like to be paired, we also have a speakers bureau of clinicians who have raised their hands and said, I will talk with community-based organizations, faith-based organizations about vaccines and vaccine safety, much like Dr. Shah just did with all of you. We can also help to connect you with a clinician to do some advanced education or offer that to your community as well. So with that, I will, I've not been following questions in the chat, so I hope I didn't miss too many.
They're mostly all addressed at the moment, Liana.
Great. Thanks. Any questions about that or?
I was still looking for the link to the form so that I can share that with other communities. Is someone going to put that in the chat?
We're trying to grab it, sorry.
Oh, okay. No, thank you. I just wanted to
No
make sure I
problem.
didn't miss it.
Yeah, I had another one. Oh, there it is. Carla Hunt has just put it up. And
I
it's,
see it.
yeah, it's really easy. And anything you don't have on hand, you don't have vaccinators or you don't have, you know, nurses or a vaccine, we can help arrange. Liana and her group as well as our group. We also have translators. Often, you know, you may have a few people in your community or nearby community that speak other languages. We have a whole group of folks that will act as cultural brokers and translators. There's transport available. We have promotional materials that you could be switched up to help you kind of put in location, that kind of thing to help do that. Yeah, so there's lots of support to do that kind of thing. And all over the state, the community action programs, the you know, different organizations are happy to sort of help step in to make sure that if there are parts to this that, you know, are harder to figure out, because like you say, there might be 5 people in your congregation, but there might be 5 people someplace right down the street, and working together to try to just do what is possible.
And I am gonna, I did want to address a point that I saw in the chat earlier, and I'm not sure that Dr. Shah got to, which was somebody threw a question in there that they receive from members of their congregation sometimes, which is, why are we so worried about kids if indeed COVID affects them less severely than it does adults? I did want to just offer a way to have that conversation with community members. And I'll offer this both as someone who spent a lot of time talking with pediatricians from our clinician group and as a mother of 4 children, which is that it may be true that we've seen COVID affect them less severely. There have been cases of children getting quite sick, and one child sick is too many children sick, right? As members of a community, that should matter to us. But more so, and for those who still don't feel like that feels like quite the reality for them, I think the thing that has been very real for many of us with children is quarantine and time away from friends and time away from school, and the toll that that has taken on the mental health of our young people. And so while maybe they won't get as sick, they will be pulled out of their lives for another 10 days. And haven't they done that quite enough this year? Right? Don't they deserve to be in community with us? And don't we know how much has been lost for kids for the last year with that kind of disruption, both in their health and mental health? And so I often go there with parents because whether or not they believe the vaccines are safe or good, they believe their children should have an opportunity to be in their communities and receive education and be healthy. So I did just want to say that as a parent more than anything else.
We have put into the chat the link to the social support system, which helps you. There's a quick link, and anybody or a household that needs information, that needs that it might be a case or a contact that needs help with quarantining, getting tested, helping with unemployment, all kinds of things that have come under that. Please feel free to take a look. Anybody, including the person themselves or a friend or their doctor, can fill out the form requesting support if they test positive or they're a close contact. And some people might even, if they're needing testing, we can also help arrange that. They don't have to be a close contact necessarily. And then I finally just want to speak briefly to, we've had probably 80 to 100 calls per month in the last few months as the chaplains group has worked with us. And we have found, as Lori Whittemore says, they're the one group that calls, that doesn't ask anything of our clients, that in fact calls, it's an open-ended cold call for which people are very grateful. And they just, open up their they may want to talk about any number of things, but it has been incredibly helpful for those of us providing social support or trying to do contact tracing. Sometimes we get information that we would never have gotten if somebody hadn't taken that time. So cheers to the chaplains.
And cheers to you at DHHS, Sharon, Leanna, Carla, for making this connection in the first place. We are so grateful. As you could tell from all the questions that came pouring into the chat, clergy are on the front lines like so many others are right now, but we're all tired and confused and not sure what to do, and having a chance to talk with all of you and get information that's reliable and support and affirmation has just been great. We're so grateful for you doing this for us and for all you're doing for everyone here in Maine. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all of you for all you've been doing to support communities for the last year and a half, especially, but in general. So, and it's really, truly our pleasure to work with you. And if there are questions that didn't get answered today or additional thoughts, I will also, I'll throw my email in the chat. Jane, I will send you this recording so you can share it amongst those who maybe weren't able to be there. So with that, unless there's any final questions, I think I will wish everyone a wonderful afternoon. And yes, I will copy the chat as well. Thank you for the reminder.
Thank you, Leanna, and thanks everyone for being here.
Well, thank you from Booth Bay Harbor. Yes. Okay. Leave.
Ian, do you know how I save this chat? Why do I not see that lovely button today?
Let me see.
Liana, one of the people on here is one of the nurses at the shelter. She's her name's Paravash, and she is Yeah, she's one of the nurses at the quarantine shelter put there by Maxim. We just got to meet her in person yesterday.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, she also does the Farsi translation for materials for COVID for, I think it might be Maine or from Maine Medical Center. I couldn't quite remember which one it was. But so I'm gonna also connect her to Charles. She's a doer.
That's awesome.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Yeah, I didn't know that was her that was doing it. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
So there used to be like a button that said save chat, right?
I know.
Wasn't in my mind. It used to be
Nope.
there.
It may automatically save it if you just save it.